At my wedding reception in Lancaster, Ohio, my father stood in front of 126 guests and handed me a $240,000 invoice for raising me. I was Elowen Winnie Mercer, 34, a CPA from Columbus, and for 9 years I had quietly paid his store bills, his medical bills, my sister's credit card debt, even the roof over Mercer Hardware. He thought marriage made me financially ready to repay him. What he did not know was that my maid of honor had my envelope too, and mine proved my parents had already taken $268,920 from me. Chapter 1. My father handed me a bill at my wedding reception before he ever gave me a toast. It was October 2025, inside the Lancaster Elks Lodge in Ohio, and the room looked exactly the way I had imagined it during the months when I still believed the worst thing that could happen at my wedding was rain. Warm gold lights hung over 126 guests. Ivory flowers sat in low glass bowls on white tablecloths. Champagne glasses caught the light. The cake stood near the corner like something out of a magazine I had pretended not to care about. I was sitting at the head table in my wedding dress, my left hand still unfamiliar with the weight of Nate Calder's ring. Nate was beside me, 35 years old, calm in the way only a civil engineer could be calm, the kind of man who could look at a cracked bridge support and say there was still time to fix it. I had married him less than 3 hours earlier at First Community Church of Lancaster, and for the first time in years, I had almost let myself believe the day belonged to me. Gordon Calder, Nate's father, had just finished his toast. It had been short, awkward, and so sincere that half the room laughed and the other half cried. "Marianne Calder." My new mother-in-law was dabbing her eyes with a napkin. My maid of honor, Sienna Cross, sat 2 chairs down from me with her clutch pressed neatly against her lap. Then my father stood up. Russell Mercer was 61 years old, owner of Mercer Hardware and Supply, and a man who could make a compliment sound like a receipt. He adjusted his tie, smoothed one hand over the front of his jacket, and touched the inside pocket of his suit coat as if making sure something was still there. People turned toward him with soft, expectant smiles. Fathers gave toasts at weddings. Fathers told embarrassing stories. Fathers said they were proud. My father did not lift a glass. He walked to the head table and placed a manila envelope in front of me. The logo of Mercer Hardware and Supply was printed in the top corner, the same logo I had seen on invoices, purchase orders, and collection notices my entire childhood. Then he smiled at me in front of everyone and said that now that I was married and financially established, "Sweetheart, it was time we settled the family investment." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. The room seemed to keep moving without sound. Forks hovered. Someone gave a small, nervous laugh that died almost immediately. I opened the envelope. The first page was printed on store letterhead. Across the top, in bold black type, it read invoice, cost of raising Elowen Mercer, 1991 to 2009. Total due, $240,000. Payable upon marriage and financial independence. I remember Nate's hand finding my knee under the table. I remember Marianne Calder going still across the room. I remember my mother, Colleen Mercer, sitting with her back straight and her lips pressed together, looking less like a woman watching her daughter be humiliated and more like a bookkeeper waiting for a signature. My younger sister, Briar, stared into her wine glass. She did not laugh. She did not stop him either. I did not cry. I looked at the invoice. I looked at my father. Then I looked at Sienna's clutch, because my father thought he was the only person who had brought an envelope to my wedding. He did not know I had one too, and mine had bank statements behind every line. But to understand why my father thought he could bill me for being his daughter, you have to understand that the invoice did not begin at my wedding. It began in the living room of our ranch house in Lancaster. When I was 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on the carpet on Christmas morning, while my father added up the price of my presents on a yellow legal pad. It was 2001. My sister Briar was 7, still young enough to believe Christmas morning meant magic. I was old enough to understand that magic in our house came with totals. My father sat in his recliner with a calculator balanced on one knee. Every time I opened something, he wrote it down. A set of colored pencils from a clearance rack. a blue sweater from the church donation bin, a used bicycle from a yard sale that still had another kid's faded sticker on the frame. He read each price aloud the way he read item numbers at the hardware store. My mother stood near the kitchen doorway in her robe, sipping coffee. She did not tell him to stop. She only said that my father wanted us girls to understand value. That was the first time I remember realizing that value in the Mercer house did not mean worth. It meant price. By middle school, I had learned not to ask for much. Asking made my father's shoulders tense. Asking made my mother sigh and open a drawer. Asking turned me into a line item. In 2004, I wanted to go to band camp. The fee was $625. I had borrowed a flute from school, practiced in the garage because Breyer said the sound gave her a headache, and my music teacher had written a note saying I had real potential. I carried the brochure home like it was a college acceptance letter. My father circled the number 625 in thick red pen and stuck the brochure to the refrigerator with a Mercer hardware magnet. "That is money we will never see again," he said. The brochure stayed there for almost 2 years. Through birthdays, report cards, snow days, and summer heat, that red circle watched me every time I reached for milk. I stopped asking about band camp. I stopped asking about most things. When I was 13, I found my mother's blue spiral notebook. I was looking for a pen in the kitchen junk drawer. Under takeout menus, rubber bands, and old batteries, I saw my name, Elowen. Then Breyer's, I pulled the notebook out and opened it. There were dates, amounts, and categories: school shoes, lunch account, dentist, winter coat, field trip, prescription, haircut. Every ordinary cost of raising a child had been written down like customer debt. It was not a household budget. I knew what a budget looked like. This was a ledger. My mother came into the kitchen and saw it in my hands. She did not gasp. She did not snatch it away in shame. She simply took it from me, closed it, slid it back into the drawer, and told me that one day I would understand what raising children costs. I said nothing. I was 13. I did not have the words yet to ask why a mother needed a ledger to remember loving her children. The habit came from my grandfather, Silas Mercer, though in our house people called it wisdom. Silas opened Mercer Hardware and Supply in 1978 and ran it like a church, where the only commandment was that nothing left the building unpaid for. My father grew up stocking shelves, sweeping sawdust, and listening to Silas say that nothing was free, not even family. When Silas died, my father inherited the store, the customer accounts, the old green cash drawer, and the belief that every relationship had a balance due. We were not destitute. That was the part that always confused me as a child. We had a house, we had food, my parents owned a business. But every dollar spent on Breyer or me was treated like evidence in a case we did not know we were losing. My mother worked part-time as the bookkeeper for the store. At home, she kept books on feelings too. She remembered who had needed new shoes, who had used extra heat during a winter cold, who had cost more that month. By the time I turned 18, I had become very good at being inexpensive. In 2009, I got into Ohio State University. I had a strong scholarship, enough to make people at school congratulate me like I had escaped already. But scholarships did not cover everything. There were deposits, books, room and board, the 1,000 small costs that stood between Lancaster and a life where I could breathe. My father called a family meeting at the kitchen table. I still remember the light over that table, yellow and tired, buzzing faintly above us. Breyer stood in the hallway, 15 years old, pretending not to listen. My mother stood at the sink, drying the same plate over and over, though it had been dry for several minutes. My father slid a paper toward me. It was printed on Mercer hardware letterhead. At the top were the words Family Investment Acknowledgement. It said Russell and Colleen Mercer had made a significant investment in the upbringing and future of Elowen Mercer, and that upon achieving financial independence, I would make reasonable efforts to repay that family investment. It did not look like a real contract. Even at 18, I knew that. It had no clear repayment terms, no actual schedule, no lawyer's name, no explanation of what reasonable meant. But I also knew what was sitting on the other side of that paper. College, distance, a dorm room, A chance to become someone whose life could not be totaled on a kitchen pad. My father tapped the signature line with one finger. My mother kept drying the plate. Briar watched from the hallway. I signed. Not because I believed I owed them for raising me. Not because I believed love could be financed retroactively. I signed because in that house, saying no always cost more than agreeing. A few weeks later, I left Lancaster for Ohio State with clothes from clearance racks, a folder full of scholarship papers, and one signed sheet my father believed would someday turn daughterhood into accounts receivable. Chapter 2, Ohio State did not feel like freedom at first. It felt like a dorm room that smelled like microwaved noodles, a shared bathroom with hair in the drain, and a campus so large I got lost twice during orientation, and once on the way back from buying used textbooks. But nobody there put a price tag on my dinner. For the first time in my life, I could spend $9 on a sandwich without hearing my father's calculator in the back of my head. I did not live like the other girls on my floor. I worked the morning shift at a coffee shop off High Street, entered data for a medical billing office 3 evenings a week, and picked up seasonal tax prep work on weekends as soon as anyone would let me near a return. I studied accounting because numbers felt cleaner than people. Numbers did not sigh. Numbers did not say, "One day you will understand what raising children costs." Numbers told the truth if you entered them correctly. I graduated in 2013 without walking across the stage with the kind of joy people expect. I remember holding my diploma and thinking, "This paper is mine." Then almost immediately, I wondered how long it would take my father to decide it belonged on his ledger. In 2014, Whitcomb and Raines CPAs in Columbus hired me at $58,000 a year. To anyone in Lancaster, that sounded like success. To me, after rent, taxes, student costs, gas, groceries, and the constant fear of needing help, it felt like standing on a chair in a room that was still flooding. I rented a small apartment with thin walls. I drove a used Corolla that rattled when I turned left. I did not take vacations. I did not buy a new car. I did not decorate like the women I worked with, who had framed prints and matching dishes and weekend trips planned months ahead. I told myself I was being responsible. The truth was, I was still living like someone might hand me a bill for being careless. By 2016, I had passed my CPA exams and my salary moved to $74,000. By 2020, I was making $92,000. In 2022, $108,000. By 2024, $126,000, plus a tax season bonus that came after months of eating dinner at my desk. I was not rich. I was tired, careful, and good at postponing my own life. The first recorded call came in January 2016. My father called while I was leaving the office after a 12-hour day. His voice had that controlled tightness he used when he wanted me to feel the emergency before he explained it. "The truck needs a transmission repair," he said. "The store can't run without it." "How much?" $1,200. I would not ask if it was not necessary. I sent it through Zelle in the parking garage before I started the car. In the memo line I wrote, "Dad, truck repair." He did not say thank you. He said, "That's what family does." At the time, I let that be enough. I wanted to be a good daughter. I wanted to believe that help given freely could soften something in him. But the phone kept lighting up. My mother called about the liability insurance premium. My father called about a supplier invoice that had to be paid by Friday. Briar texted about a credit card minimum she had missed because her hours at Mercer Hardware had been cut. Then the store needed a new POS system. Then the HVAC at the house failed during a humid June week. Then there was a property tax shortfall. Then my father's knee surgery came with deductibles and copays that added up to $11,300. Then Briar needed $6,720 for a used car because hers died outside the store. I did not resent every payment. That was the part people never understood. I knew families helped each other. I knew businesses had bad months. I knew medical bills could wreck people. What wore me down was what happened after I sent the money. Silence. A few days of silence if I was lucky. Then the next request. One afternoon, an invoice from Evan Mercer, a local contractor who was not related to us despite the name, landed in my email. Roof deposit for Mercer Hardware and Supply, $18,750. I stared at it for a full minute, certain there had been a mistake. I called him. Evan, this is Elowen Mercer. I think you sent this to the wrong person. He sounded confused. Your dad said you handled the deposit. My mouth went dry. He said that? Yeah. Said you were the one to email for payment. That was the first time I understood my father had stopped asking whether I could help. He had started giving my name to other people, like I was a family credit line. My mother did the same thing, only softer. Honey, your father is embarrassed to ask, she said one evening. But the insurance agent is waiting. Did Briar contribute anything? My mother's voice cooled. Your sister is still finding her footing. Briar was 22 then, working part-time at the store, getting paid cash when the drawer allowed it, still living close enough to my parents that they could call her loyal and call me distant. When I asked why she had charged more on a card I had just helped pay down, she snapped before I finished the question. You're the one with the real job, Winnie. That sentence did something to me. It took every late night, every exam, every careful choice, and turned it into an excuse for taking more. During tax season that year, Tessa Cross, one of the partners at Whitcomb and Rains, found me in the break room staring at a vending machine dinner and asked if I was sleeping. I laughed because the answer was embarrassing. A week later, after a client meeting, I told her a small part of the truth. The paper my father had made me sign, the calls, the invoices. Tessa did not laugh. That sounds less like a contract and more like a leash, she said. She connected me with Marcia Bell, a family law attorney she trusted. I met Marcia for coffee downtown, expecting her to tell me I was overreacting. Instead, she listened with the calm face of a woman who had heard worse from families with better Christmas cards. Parents generally cannot bill an adult child for the ordinary cost of raising them, Marcia said. That paper sounds vague. No clear repayment terms, no real promissory note. And you were under family pressure, so it means nothing? In court, probably very little. But families like this do not always need court. Sometimes they just need guilt, a room full of witnesses, and a daughter who freezes. She told me that if I kept helping, I should keep records, bank statements, Zelle memos, emails, invoices, not because I plan to sue. Because memory gets rewritten by people who speak first. So I built a spreadsheet. At first, I named it Mercer Family Support. Date, amount, purpose, payment method, memo, running total. Later I added backup. Bank statement, Zelle confirmation, email, invoice. I told myself it was just good record keeping, a CPA habit. Nothing more. From January 2016 to September 2025, there would eventually be 105 documented transfers. Some months I sent one payment, some months none. Some months I paid an invoice directly and sent cash the same week. Documented support reached $176,400. Emergency payments would reach $92,520. I did not know the final total yet. I only knew the file kept growing. Thanksgiving 2021 was the first time I added a column that was not about money. I drove to Lancaster with a pie balanced on the passenger seat and arrived early enough to hear Briar in the kitchen. She got out, Briar said. The least she can do is help the people who raised her. I stopped in the hallway with my hand around the pie tin. My mother murmured something I could not make out. Nobody defended me. At dinner, my father used the phrase family investment, like he was talking about a stock that had finally matured. My mother asked why I did not come home more often. Briar wore new boots I recognized from the credit card payoff I had covered 2 months earlier. She crossed them under the table and never once said thank you. That night, I drove back to Columbus in the dark and opened the spreadsheet before I took off my coat. I added one more column, acknowledged, then I went line by line, truck repair, insurance, HVAC, Briar credit card, property tax, roof deposit, supplier debt, POS system. Some entries had received. One had a thumbs up emoji. Most had nothing. I filtered the column for no, the screen filled. I sat there looking at years of my life reduced to outgoing payments and blank spaces where gratitude should have been. I cried then, not because I wanted the money back, but because I finally understood what they had done to my love. They had turned it into an obligation. I saved the file under a new name. Receipts. At the time, I thought I was only preserving the truth for myself. I had no idea that one day, that same file would sit with me at my wedding table. Chapter 3. In 2022, at a backyard barbecue in Dublin, I met Nate Calder because a coworker insisted I needed to spend one Saturday somewhere that did not involve tax software, bank statements, or my phone lighting up with the word mom. Nate was standing by a folding table, fixing one of the legs with a calm seriousness that made me laugh before I knew his name. He was 32 then, a civil engineer and project manager, the kind of man who checked whether a chair was stable before letting someone sit in it. He was not flashy. He did not fill the yard with stories about himself. He listened first, answered carefully, and when I spilled lemonade near the cooler, he handed me paper towels without making it a performance. "I build bridges for a living," he said, smiling. "But today I'm mostly responsible for keeping this table from collapsing." There was something steady about him that my body recognized before my mind did. I had spent my whole life around people who treated every favor like a future invoice. Nate moved through the world like help was just something people gave when help was needed. The first time he took me to his parents' house in Dublin, I almost did not know how to behave. Gordon Calder was 66, a retired postal worker with rough hands and a quiet voice. Marianne Calder was 63, a retired elementary teacher who hugged me at the door and sent me home with lasagna in a glass container before I had done anything to earn it. I stood in their kitchen holding the container like it had instructions hidden underneath. "Do I bring this back next time?" I asked. Marianne looked confused for half a second, then smiled. "Only if you want more." At my parents' house, everything had a receipt. At the Calder's house, love came with leftovers. Nate proposed in 2024 on the small back porch of my Columbus apartment. No restaurant, no crowd, no photographer crouching behind a bush, just evening light, my old patio chairs, and his hands shaking slightly when he opened the ring box. "I don't want a life where we keep score," he said. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We planned the wedding for October 2025. First Community Church of Lancaster for the ceremony, Lancaster Elks Lodge for the reception. The budget was $31,500, paid by Nate and me in installments from savings and bonuses. It was not extravagant, but it was ours. My mother treated that fact like an insult. Colleen wanted her pastor involved. She wanted to add families from church to the guest list. She wanted different centerpieces, a mother-daughter candle moment, and a seating chart that placed half of Mercer Hardware's customers closer to the front than Nate's cousins. "Mom, Nate and I are paying for this," I said one evening over the phone. "We'll make those decisions." The silence that followed was long enough for me to hear her refrigerator humming. "You don't need me for anything anymore, do you?" she asked. It was not a question. It was an accusation dressed as grief. My father took a different approach. He called Nate directly one night while I was reviewing engagement photos on my laptop. Nate answered on speaker because he thought it might be about logistics. "You're getting a bargain," my father said, warm and joking in that public voice of his. "We put a lot into that girl." Nate's smile faded. He looked at me, confused. I understood immediately. Investment language had followed me out of my childhood and into my engagement like a shadow. 3 months before the wedding, Aunt Laurel called from Dayton to congratulate me. She sounded happy at first, then hesitant in that way relatives get when they are trying to step around something sharp. "Your father says the store has been carrying a lot alone since you got busy with your career," she said. I sat down at my kitchen table. "What does that mean?" Laurel sighed. "He just says you do what you can when you remember, that you've been distant." After we hung up, I called my cousin Rachel Mercer Vale in Cincinnati. She confirmed it. In the family group chat, my father had been telling people a careful version of my life. I was successful but too busy, grateful but not enough, helpful but only when convenient. He had taken my money and erased my fingerprints from every bill it paid. I opened receipts that night and added a new column called Notes. Not amount, not method, not backup. Just who said what, when, and to whom. A week later, I drove to Lancaster to drop off an updated seating chart for my mother. Mercer hardware smelled the way it always had: paint, fertilizer, sawdust, and old coffee. The repaired roof did not leak anymore. The PS system I had paid for sat on the counter blinking politely. My father's supplier debt was invisible, which was exactly the point. Audrey Haynes, a longtime customer, stood near the paint aisle with a woman from church. She smiled when she saw me. "Well, look who came back," she said, half teasing. "Your dad says he's been carrying the store alone since you got too important for Lancaster." The words landed quietly, but in front of witnesses. My father stood near the register and heard every word. He did not correct her. He only gave a thin little smile, like the story was useful to him. I did not defend myself. I did not pull out my phone and show Audrey the roof deposit, the insurance premium, the supplier payment. I handed my mother the seating chart and left before my hands started shaking. That night in Columbus, I opened the spreadsheet and typed. Audrey Haynes repeated Dad's version in store. Dad present. Did not correct. Mercer Hardware was struggling. I knew that. The big box store on the edge of town had taken customers. Online suppliers had shaved down margins. Insurance went up. Property taxes went up. My father refused to modernize anything until the emergency became expensive enough to call me. I understood pressure. What I did not understand was how he could let me pay for survival and then tell people he had survived alone. Breyer made it worse because she lived inside the story he told. She was still in Lancaster, still working part-time at the store, still close enough to my parents to be called loyal and far enough from independence to be called fragile. One afternoon, I found her outside the store by the loading area, smoking even though she always denied smoking. "Why don't you ever tell them?" I asked. "Tell who what?" "The family. The people at church. Anyone. You know I've helped." She flicked ash onto the pavement. "Because you left. You always leave." I stayed and listened to them complain. "You stayed because they made it easier for you to stay than to grow." Her face hardened. "And you got out," she snapped. "So forgive me if I don't cry because you had to pay something back." That was Breyer, not innocent, not evil, trapped, resentful, and willing to let me be punished for escaping. The week of the wedding, I booked a room at the Hampton Inn on River Valley Boulevard instead of staying at my parents' house. My mother acted wounded. "We have a guest room," she said. "I need space to get ready." What I did not say was that I could not sleep under the same roof as the drawer where her blue ledger used to live. 2 days before the ceremony, I stopped by Mercer Hardware and saw Breyer behind the counter with a FedEx office receipt beside her elbow. When she saw me looking, she folded it and shoved it into the drawer. "Printing wedding programs?" I asked. "None of your business," she said. My father was strangely cheerful that week. He whistled in the store. He patted the inside pocket of his suit jacket whenever he thought no one was watching. My mother looked tense, but rehearsed, like a woman who had decided not to stop a bad thing because she had helped plan it. At the rehearsal dinner at Buckeye Smokehouse, Gordon stood and gave a gentle toast about Nate being stubborn but kind, and about me being smart but not needing to be strong every second. People laughed softly. Marianne smiled at me like she meant every word. Then my father stood. He talked about raising me as the biggest investment he and my mother had ever made. He used the word investment again and again. He said some investments took years to mature, but when the time came, a responsible person knew how to collect. A few people laughed awkwardly. Marianne's smile disappeared. That night at the Hampton Inn, I went downstairs for ice because I needed a reason to move. Breyer was sitting in the lobby, waiting. "They have something planned," she said. My stomach tightened. "What?" "An envelope, itemized." She looked exhausted, almost angry that she was telling me. "I'm not on your side, Winnie. I'm just not cruel enough to let you be completely blindsided." I held the empty ice bucket against my hip. "Why are they only billing me?" Breyer looked toward the stairwell, then back at me. "Because you're the one who has something to take." Then she walked away. I stood alone in the hotel lobby, listening to the vending machine hum against the wall, and understood that my wedding was no longer just a wedding. It was about to become the room where my parents tried to stamp the word debtor across my name in front of everyone I loved. Chapter 4. I did not sleep that night. Nate did, or at least he tried to. He lay on his side in the dim hotel room, one hand under the pillow, breathing slowly like a man who had not grown up with a ledger in the kitchen drawer. The soft hum of the Hampton Inn air conditioner filled the room. Outside the window, River Valley Boulevard was quiet except for the occasional wash of headlights across the curtains. I sat by the window with my laptop open on my knees and the empty ice bucket near my feet. There were 3 things I could do. I could call my parents right then and demand to know what they had planned. I could pretend Briar had misunderstood and walk into my wedding reception, hoping my family would choose decency. Or I could prepare. Preparation had always been the safest kind of courage for me. I had never been the daughter who slammed doors or screamed in kitchens. I was the daughter who kept copies, so I opened the file named Receipts. The spreadsheet loaded slowly, row after row of the life I had been trying not to count. January 2016 through September 2025. 105 documented transfers. Some months had 1 payment. Some had none. Some had a Zelle transfer and an invoice paid directly from my checking account in the same week. The supporting folder was worse because it had texture. Bank statements. Zelle confirmations. Emails from my mother with subject lines like quick favor and hate to ask. Evan Mercer's roof invoice. Insurance confirmations. Fairfield County property tax receipts. Supplier debt payoffs. The credit card payment I had made for Briar. I updated the summary page with hands steadier than I felt. Documented support, $176,400. Emergency payments, $92,520. Grand total, $268,920. I stared at that final number for so long the digits stopped looking like money and started looking like years. Vacations I never took. Furniture I never bought. A down payment that never happened. Nights I told myself I was lucky to be useful. I thought about Marcia Bell saying that a vague family investment paper would not hold much weight in court, but guilt did not need a judge. It only needed a daughter who froze in public. I thought about Tessa Cross telling me that if someone used numbers to hurt me, my numbers had better be cleaner. At 2:17 in the morning, I went downstairs to the Hotel Business Center in an Ohio State hoodie, pajama pants, and hotel slippers. The night clerk glanced up from her phone and then politely looked away. I printed 12 pages, a cover page, a yearly summary, documented transfers, emergency payments, a backup reference list. The first page read invoice. Services rendered to Russell and Colleen Mercer. January 2016 to September 2025. Prepared by Elowen Mercer, CPA. Under that, I added 1 line, all amounts supported by bank records, receipts, or written requests. I put the pages into a plain white hotel envelope. No letterhead, no logo, nothing dramatic. Just the truth. The next morning, before my hair was pinned up and before the makeup artist told me to stop blinking, I handed that envelope to Sienna Cross. She looked at it, then at my face. Do I need to know? Only if I ask for it. Sienna nodded once and slipped it into her clutch. That was why she was my maid of honor. She knew when not to make me explain a wound while it was still open. The ceremony at First Community Church of Lancaster was almost beautiful enough to make me forget what was coming. Lily Calder, Nate's 5-year-old niece, threw flower petals like she had been personally hired to cover every inch of the aisle. People laughed. Marianne smiled through tears. Gordon looked uncomfortable in his suit, but proud in a way that did not ask for repayment. Then my father took my arm. For one moment, walking down that aisle, I hated myself for wanting it to mean something. Russell Mercer's hand was firm around mine. He smelled like aftershave and the hardware store, metal, pine dust, and coffee. I wanted him to be a father, just for those 30 steps. I wanted him to look at me and see his daughter instead of a long-term investment finally dressed in white. He placed my hand in Nate's. Nate squeezed gently, like he knew I had crossed more than an aisle. When he said his vows, his voice only shook once. I promise I will never make you earn the love I already promised you. I nearly broke then, not because it was poetic, but because it was the opposite of everything I had been taught. By the time we reached the Lancaster Elks Lodge, I already knew the room could turn at any moment. Still, for a while, it almost felt ordinary. Gordon gave his toast, short and clumsy and sweet. Marianne spoke with the kind of warmth that did not ask me to earn it. Then Sienna stood and said I had spent my life quietly rescuing people who rarely noticed I was tired. Across the room, my father's face hardened. Mara Ellis, our wedding coordinator, approached me during dinner with a careful expression. Across the room, Russell was speaking low to Colleen and Briar, one hand touching the inside pocket of his jacket. "Do you want me to adjust the speech order?" Mara asked quietly. I looked at my father. He looked almost cheerful. "No," I said. "Let him speak." A few minutes later, Russell stood and tapped a knife against his water glass. The sound moved through the room like a warning bell. He began with a few sentences about sacrifice, about parenthood, about all the things mothers and fathers give that children never see. People listened politely. Then he walked to the head table and placed the manila envelope in front of me. "Your mother and I believe in doing things properly," he said, "so we itemized it." The first page showed the total, $240,000. Hospital and delivery, food and clothing, housing share, utility share, health insurance, school supplies, vacations, miscellaneous parental sacrifice. I felt Nate tense beside me. Across the room, Marianne stopped moving completely. I stood. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The room had already gone quiet enough to hear the ice settle in glasses. "The hospital and delivery line is interesting," I said, "because Dad had a group insurance plan through the store." Russell blinked. "The clothing line is generous, too. A lot of what I wore came from church donation bins, clearance racks, and older cousins." Colleen's hand tightened around her napkin. "And food and housing," I said, looking down at the page, "are listed as if I had been a tenant instead of a child you chose to have." A few people shifted in their chairs. I set his invoice on the table. "But I understand the format," I said. "I brought one too." Then I turned to Sienna. "The envelope, please." Sienna stood without hesitation and handed me the plain white envelope. My father's face changed so quickly most people might have missed it. I did not. I removed the cover page and held it where the nearest tables could see. From January 2016 to September 2025, I documented $176,400 in support to my parents. I also paid $92,520 in emergency expenses: store roof, liability insurance, HVAC, property taxes, my father's medical bills, my sister's credit card debt, supplier invoices, a POS system the store still uses. Briar looked down. "Every number on this page has a bank statement, a confirmation email, or a receipt behind it." The silence deepened. I placed my page beside his. "Your invoice is $240,000. My receipts total $268,920. I looked at my father. "By your own math, Dad, you owe me $28,920. His face went red. "This is ridiculous." Colleen leaned forward and whispered, "Elowen, not here." I looked at her. "You chose here." Russell slapped one hand on the table hard enough to rattle a fork. "We raised you." I nodded once. That was parenting, not alone. He started talking then, loudly, about disrespect and humiliation, and how I had always thought I was better than the family that made me. I let him talk for a few seconds because every word helped the room understand him better. "I'm not collecting the $28,920, I said, "because when I sent that money, I thought I was helping my family. I did not send it as a transaction. You are the one who brought an invoice to my wedding." Marianne Calder stood. She did not shout. She did not make a scene. She only looked at my father and said, "Russell, a child does not owe a bill for being born. And a daughter does not become ungrateful because she stops being useful." Something moved through the room then, a breath, a shift. Audrey Haynes covered her mouth. Aunt Laurel stared at Russell like she was seeing the missing half of a story. My mother's face crumpled, but not the way I expected. She looked at me with wet eyes and said softly, "I just wanted you to need me." That hurt more than the invoice, because I understood then that it had never been only about money. It was control. It was the comfort of knowing I still felt indebted enough to answer. Briar stood halfway, then froze. For the first time all night, she looked less satisfied than scared. My father grabbed his manila envelope, but the room had already seen enough. Colleen rose beside him. Briar followed a few seconds later. They walked out together, stiff-backed and silent. The door of the Lancaster Elks Lodge closed behind them. I stood in the middle of my own wedding reception with my hand still resting on the receipts, and for the first time in my life, no one in that room could say I had not helped my family. Chapter 5. For a few seconds after the doors shut behind my parents and Briar, nobody moved. The music had stopped. The servers stood frozen near the kitchen doors. Someone's fork rested halfway across a salad plate. I could feel 126 people trying to decide whether they had just witnessed a family argument, a financial audit, or the funeral of the version of me my father had spent years inventing. My hand was still on the receipts. Then Nate stood beside me. He did not grab the papers. He did not try to speak for me. He only touched my elbow and asked very softly, "Do you want to leave?" I looked around the room. Sienna's eyes were wet. Gordon Calder had one hand on Marianne's shoulder. Aunt Laurel was staring at the door with her mouth slightly open. Audrey Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear into the tablecloth. And the strangest thing was, nobody was looking at me like a debtor. They were looking at me like someone who had survived something in public. I wiped under one eye with the side of my finger, turned toward Calvin Ross, the DJ, and said, "Can you play something loud enough to save what's left of my wedding?" Calvin blinked once, then nodded like I had given him the most important job of his career. The first notes came through the speakers too loudly, bright and ridiculous and merciful. Sienna started clapping before anyone else did. Then Gordon held out his hand to Marianne and pulled her onto the dance floor. Nate looked down at me. "Are you sure?" I looked at the empty doorway where my family had left. "No," I said, "but I want to dance at my own wedding." So we danced. It was not the reception I had planned. There was a strange tenderness to it after that, like everyone left in the room had quietly agreed to handle the rest of the night with both hands. People hugged me without asking questions. A few apologized in low voices for things they had believed because Russell Mercer had said them with confidence. Aunt Laurel came to me near the cake table and cried into my shoulder. "I believed him," she whispered. "He made it sound like you left and never looked back." I did not show her the whole spreadsheet. I did not need to. "He told the part where I left," I said. "He skipped the part where I kept paying." Audrey Haynes approached me later, shame written all over her face. "Your father told people the store survived because he never quit." "He did work hard," I said. "He just didn't work alone." That was all I had the energy to give her. That night at the Hampton Inn, Nate helped take the pins out of my hair. They fell onto the counter one by one, tiny silver pieces of a day that had nearly broken open. I sat on the edge of the bathtub in my wedding dress, exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. "I ruined our wedding," I said. Nate knelt in front of me, still in his shirt and loosened tie. "No," he said. "Your father brought a match. You brought the fire extinguisher. That's different." I laughed once, but it came out cracked. 1 week later, Lancaster started doing what small towns do. It talked not because I posted anything. I did not upload the invoice. I did not write a long explanation on Facebook. I did not send my spreadsheet to everyone in Fairfield County. I did not have to. 126 people had watched my father put a bill on my wedding table, and they had watched me put receipts beside it. At church, people asked why Russell had thought a daughter owed money for being raised. At Mercer Hardware, a customer asked him if I had really paid for the roof. Another asked whether the new POS system was the one I bought. Russell still opened the store every morning, still stood behind the counter, still carried himself like a man people should respect. But now there was a question in the air every time someone looked at him. Aunt Laurel called relatives in Dayton, Cincinnati, and Columbus. She did not spread gossip. She corrected a lie. Rachel's Mercer Vale texted me 3 days after the wedding. "I'm sorry I believed him." I stared at that message for a long time. A younger version of me would have typed 3 paragraphs explaining myself. That version would have attached proof. That version would have begged to be understood. I wrote back, "Thank you." Then I put the phone down. Briar texted first with anger. "You humiliated them." I let the message sit. 2 days later, another one came through. "Did you really pay my credit card?" I opened the spreadsheet, found the line, and sent her a screenshot. Briar credit card payoff. $8,200. Backup attached. She did not answer for 3 days. When she finally called, her voice was different. Not kind exactly, not apologetic, just smaller. "Mom's crying all the time," she said. "Dad won't talk. The store is short because your auto transfer didn't come in." I sat still. "Which auto transfer?" Silence. That silence told me she had not known I knew. I opened my banking app after we hung up. The recurring transfer was still there. $1,800 a month to Russell and Colleen Mercer. It had been so automatic for so long that part of me had stopped seeing it as a choice. My thumb hovered over cancel. I thought of myself at 10 years old, listening to my father price my Christmas gifts. I thought of the Bandcamp brochure with $625 circled in red. I thought of my mother's blue notebook. I thought of my father's invoice on my wedding table. Then I canceled it. No music swelled. No one applauded. There was no speech. Just a button and the quiet after it. A few minutes later, I set up a new transfer. $500 a month into a $529 plan for a future child, Nate. And I did not even have yet. I was not pregnant. We were not rushing. But I wanted one part of my money to start moving toward a future without a ledger. My mother called 2 days later. At first she cried. Then she blamed me. Then she said, "You could have talked to us privately." "You could have handed me that invoice privately," I said. "You chose a room full of people because you thought I'd be too embarrassed to fight back." She went quiet. "Mom, I don't know if you wanted money or control, but I know I'm done paying for either one." Her voice broke. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said. "But I don't trust you with my guilt anymore." 3 weeks after the wedding, my father called. He did not apologize. "What are you telling people?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. The room saw enough. He breathed hard through his nose. "Your grandfather believed family had to carry its own weight. Grandpa Silas was wrong. Children don't owe repayment for being children. The store is struggling." "I know," I said. "I've known for years. I paid enough of its bills to know." He said my name like a warning. I said, "I'm not your emergency fund anymore." He hung up. 2 months later, Briar texted, "Got a job." She had been hired full-time at the Fairfield County Clerk's office. Benefits. Steady hours. A paycheck that did not come from whatever cash my father decided could leave the drawer. I wrote, "Proud of you." A few minutes passed before she answered. "I don't know how to be anything else yet." I typed back. Neither did I at first. That did not erase what she had done. It did not make us close. But for the first time, I saw that a person could be wrong and trapped at the same time. Mercer Hardware did not collapse. Life is rarely that neat. My father still opened the doors every morning. My mother still lived in the ranch house near the store. But suppliers started asking for payment up front. Customers asked questions they never would have asked before. Colleen stopped going to a few church luncheons. Nobody banished her. They simply knew too much about the ledger now. 6 months later, Nate and I bought a small house in Westerville. 3 bedrooms, a front porch, a backyard big enough for tomatoes, and a garage that actually fit a car. Gordon helped Nate fix the mailbox. Marianne brought soup and put it in the refrigerator without mentioning what it cost. That night, I opened my laptop and created a new file. I did not name it Receipts. I named it Home. There was no column for acknowledged, no running total. No space to track who owed what for being loved. I still kept the old spreadsheet. I did not delete it. I did not need to send it to the world. It existed because I needed proof that I had not imagined everything. I had helped. I had loved. And when that love was thrown back at me as a bill, I had placed the truth on the table. One evening, I stood in our new kitchen watching Nate install a spice rack slightly crooked. "Do you want me to measure it again?" he asked. I looked at the shelf, then at him and smiled. "For once," I said, "I don't want to measure anything." I thought about my father's $240,000 invoice. I thought about my $268,920 in receipts. I thought about the $28,920 that, by his own logic, he owed me. But Justice was never getting that money back. Justice was no longer sending $1,500 a month to buy a place in my parents' hearts. Justice was putting $500 a month toward a future where no child would be charged for being held. Justice was learning the difference between gratitude and debt. I did not get my childhood back. I got something quieter. I got the right to stop paying for love. So tell me honestly, was I wrong to open those receipts at my own wedding reception? Or was that the first time I truly defended myself? And if your parents handed you a bill for raising you, would you stay silent, pay it, or put the truth on the table for everyone to see?